Hello, everybody. I am live. Hopefully, I am live. It says I'm live. I just wanted to do a very quick video now that I have my voice back um, about writer websites because I've been thinking about this and talking about this with my students in the Book Deal Accelerator. And it's really important before you have a book deal, before you have a book published, to set up your digital presence properly online. And I just want to keep it really simple today and talk about 3 mistakes that you might be making with your website, which is totally normal. And, it can be very, very difficult to know where to start with setting up a writer website when you're like, where do I begin? How do I even say who I am? I haven't had anything published yet. Where do I even start with setting up a writer website? But I just want to start by saying it's really important that you have a digital presence. The first thing that anyone does in 2022 is to Google you. So if you are trying to get articles published, if you're trying to get a book deal, if you're trying to pitch anything, you want your digital presence to basically support whatever your goal is. And if you're a writer trying to get published, that is basically you need some kind of digital presence, say a website, which says, this person is a writer and they write about this and this is their area of expertise, and any relevant experience that you have. Now, I want to talk about 3 mistakes that I see with writers setting up their websites before, when they're pitching books or pitching articles. Most people start by just sort of setting up a blog. It can be very confusing. You sort of think, well, why should I even bother setting up a website if I haven't had anything published yet? Or, who's going to see my website? Why do I even need one? You really need one because basically having a good clear website that ranks for a couple of things, which I'll talk about in a second with Google ranking, is basically going to get you seen by the right people and have your presence or your reputation seen in the right way. So let's say you are writing, you're writing about family violence or domestic violence, and that's the topic of your nonfiction book. You might choose to share some of your published pieces to your website. You might write a blog about the topic, about latest research, about conferences and things that you've gone to. And basically you want to have your name associated with your area of expertise at a very basic level, okay, if you're trying to get a book published in that area. Now, we have so many more opportunities now than we did when I was beginning. When I started freelance writing, I actually bought a $300 fax machine and I used to send my story pictures via fax. I did not have a website. I think this was in the time of MySpace. So if I was going to set up anything, it might have been a MySpace site, but I didn't set up a MySpace site, thankfully. And I used to type up my story pictures and print them out on my fax machine. And the printer ink was so expensive. And then I would send these faxes to magazines and publications and wait days and weeks to even follow up via phone or sometimes via phone, and then I think sometimes I emailed. But things have changed a lot in 15 to 20 years with how you pitch a story. So to have a website that says who you are, that you can just link to, which has examples of your work and the area that you write in, is going to just lightning speed, just speed up the rate at which you are seen and noticed and associated with your area of topic. Your topics and areas of expertise, okay, if you're pitching stories and if you eventually want to have a published book. Okay, so I've noticed a few problems, a few common mistakes with writers when they set up their websites. And, this is a topic for hours and hours of trainings, and there's people who teach SEO, just SEO, or just the back end setting up of your website. But I want to keep it really simple because I think the main reason that most writers don't set up their websites is overwhelm. So I just want to keep it really simple. So I'm just going to talk about 3 problems that I see, and I'm a little bit puffed because I'm getting over the virus. 3 problems that I see with writers setting up their digital presence. the first thing is not having an SEO, which is search engine optimized website. Now, this does not need to be complicated. If you are a writer pitching to publications, your website or your blog just needs to be your name, your first name and your last name, okay? And then whatever the topics and themes that you write about, they're going to be the words and the keywords that you want to rank for. So you'll be splicing them throughout your website, associated with your name, and it's basically just a matter of going into the back end of your website, let's say it's on WordPress, and setting up the metadata, which is those little snippets and pieces that you have to write. For every page that you have on a website has metadata set up in the back end, and making sure that you have particular terms set up in the back end that you want to rank for. Now, for an author or a writer, these would typically be your name, okay? The reason you want to do this is because you want your name and your website to be up the top of Google when someone looks you up. You want them to see the best of your work. You don't want someone to search your name, a potential editor, for example, and come up with, say, a GoFundMe that you donated to 20 years ago, and your website isn't there until the third or the fourth page of Google. Most people don't even look past the first page on Google. That's why companies pay big bucks to get ranked on the first page of Google. So make sure you have a few basics around SEO sorted. I know with WordPress there's a free plugin that you can use. It's called Yoast. And that just ensures that your metadata is all set up correctly. You have to fill in certain terms, and then you're ranked for those terms under Google. I'm not going to go into like SEO a lot, because I've prepared a whole 90-minute masterclass on this, which you are very, very welcome to join, and then come to the workshop next week and ask your questions about your website. But at a very basic level, you want to set up your website with your name. So not, not some poetic phrase, not the name of your favorite poem, not, you basically, for writers trying to get published, you want to secure your name as the domain name for your website or your blog. Okay, that's a very basic level. And so that's the second problem that I see with websites, is that the writer is not using their name. So, or they might be using 2 or 3 different names. So let's say you've just written a piece for the Washington Post and it's been published under the name Lisa, but then your website or your blog is under the name Lucy. This is very confusing to not just humans, but to Google. And this means that it's very confusing who you are, okay? And the third piece is, and this is linked to, not using your name and the same name for everything that you're pitching and everything that you're getting published, is not being consistent. Okay, so Google and all of the digital algorithms love consistency. They love repetition, okay? So you basically want to be using similar terms, similar phrases. You want to be updating your website regularly. This is why it's good to have a blog, because if you update your blog once or twice a month, Google is going to see that and realize that it's relevant and recent content. Google rewards certain behavior on websites, and one of those is regular updates to the content. Okay, so at a very basic level, you need to be consistent. Use the same name for your blog or your website as your actual name that you're writing articles under. And write, if you're keeping a blog, write about similar topics and themes. So don't, for example, write a random blog post about your dog one week, and then the next week it's a medical blog post about lupus, because you've just gone off on a tangent of research about lupus, and then the next week you're sharing an article that you just had published. You want to keep consistent, not in terms of posting the same thing every week, but in terms of search terms, because you've got to see this from Google's point of view, even though Google is a robot and an algorithm and whatever. Google is basically just trying to find the simplest method to figure out what websites represent what are the best what websites are the best things to show when people search certain terms. And this is why you want to use your name, because you want anyone who Googles you to find your website so that you're directing the conversation about your expertise and your story. And you also want to be writing about similar topics and themes, or in a certain way consistently, so that Google can also start to rank you for those lower level keywords and long tail keywords and that sort of thing. So they're just 3 pieces and 3 very common mistakes that I see with blogs and writers who haven't been published yet, or who don't have books out yet, who are trying to get their websites set up correctly. I've learned all this stuff from a variety of jobs, but the one that I was talking about this morning with my students was when I worked for Dairy Australia, and my job was to amalgamate 52 different microsites. So they had 52 different websites about cows and dairy farming and hoof care and every other phrase and term that you could think of with cows. And yet when people went to search in Google for how to look after their cows or their dairy farms in Australia, they weren't going to any of the Dairy Australia websites. They were being directed to Dairy New Zealand. And the reason for that was because all of these microsites were scattered across the internet, and they weren't SEO optimized, and they weren't consistent, and they weren't, they basically didn't send the message to Google that this is exactly what you need to know. This is where you need to go when you're searching for information about what to do if your cow has hoof care problems, for example. I've just simplified it massively because SEO, I've found, can really overwhelm people. But basically, you want to be consistent and you want to be clear. And the most fundamental thing that you can remember as a writer is to use your own name and use the one name for your website, and set it up from there on in. So what I've done is I've created an actual digital foundations for writers course, which is it's like a 90-minute masterclass with a couple of bonus downloads that are just going to help you to set up those 3 fundamental pieces, or 4 fundamental pieces really, of your digital presence. Because in 2022, if you're pitching to publications, if you're trying to get a book published, your digital presence is everything, and it's the strongest thing that you can control in terms of how you will come across as a writer and a potential author to publishing houses and agents, okay? So I've linked to the masterclass below. I wanted to give you the opportunity to hop in before next week, because I'm actually going to be answering your questions about your websites, about your social media platforms, anything, your blogs, anything that you might have set up incorrectly or you want some help with. I'm doing a live Q&A call next Wednesday as part of the course. So if you hop in now, you will be able to join us and get your questions in and get my eyes on your website or your blog, for example, at that Q&A call. So I hope to see you next week, and I will link to that in the comments. I hope this has been helpful.